Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, edgy folk. I hope you are all well. This evening we've got a very exciting show for you, courtesy of Pearson and Darren Lester, who will be with us momentarily. But before we do any of that, I just want to introduce you to a fabulous new sponsor that we have. And it's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and an appreciation of the wider world. And if you want to find out more about that, you need to go to, this is a mouthful for you, go to go.pearson.com/ and then in capital letters, MFL GCSE 24. So hopefully you got all that, and we will hear from them again throughout the show. I can see Darren is here and ready to go, so we're just going to bring him in. Good evening, Darren. How are you doing?
If it helps, we're quite happy to introduce ourselves and make a bit of a start too.
We will do. In fact, actually, if you could all take it in turns to introduce yourselves, that would be superb. And I will be back with you in a moment.
My name's Katie Lewis, and I'm the head of MFL at Pearson EdXL. So we have obviously been working over the past couple of years on the redevelopment of the French GCSE, which was accredited by Ofqual 2 weeks ago. And I'm here with my colleague Mike John.
Thanks, Katie. I'm Mike John. Evening, everyone. I'm Senior Qualifications Manager at Pearson EdXL, so I'm working with Katie on the new qual and the current qual, of course, because that's still going ahead. And really lovely to be here tonight, and looking forward to chatting with everyone if they can get the mics to work.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Corinne. How are you?
Hiya. I'm okay, thank you. Yeah, so I've got a bit of a cold. So yes, I'm Corinne Harrington. And I also work at Pearson, but more as a kind of a trainer and consultant. So I've been working on the new specification, but I'm also one of the trainers at Pearson, and I'm also a teacher. So
thank you, Corinne. This is Darren.
Darren, you're here.
Hooray! How far through the introduction did we get? Did everybody get a chance to speak?
No, it's just Mike, Corinne, and I.
Okay.
Katie. Hi.
All right, perfect. So, Corinne, I think I interrupted you. Did you say everything that you wanted to?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's enough.
All right, perfect. Adam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello.
If you can.
Yeah, I think I've figured it out now. About time. So I'm Adam Lamb. I'm a chartered teacher. I'm a head of faculty in Hackney in East London. Got a rather large team. We enter the full cohort for GCSE, and we've got large A-level classes as well. I've been a full school lead practitioner in the past in a different guise, and I love running.
Excellent. I think, as in my experience, as long as you know that Adam loves running, you know Adam, to be honest.
Very true. Very true.
And so, Alicia, that leaves you. If you're able to unmute yourself and you'd like to introduce yourself.
So I'm Alicia Blanvillain. I am head of French at Regent High School, which is an inner London school. And we have Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, and we are trying to recruit for A levels. So we've been putting in place lots of strategies to motivate students to take languages for A levels. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk about languages and how can we reinforce our cohorts in GCSE and A level with you.
Excellent. I'm so excited to have everybody here. And my huge thanks to Pearson, who of course are sponsoring our late show this evening.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
Just in case you're not sure who I am, my name is Darren Lester. I will be the host and moderator now that I'm finally here this evening. I teach classical and modern languages from nursery right up to A-level. So I have a nice full view of the spectrum. And to be completely honest, I'm looking forward to just sitting back and listening to what all of these awesome people have to say today. We are here, of course, to talk about the relevance of language learning, because like many subjects, as we've seen over the past few weeks, we're having fewer and fewer students continue our subject through, particularly to A-level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scene to start with. I'm going to give you some facts and figures, and then we're just going to kind of open up to all of the cool things that people have to suggest that we might be able to do to mitigate some of these problems that we're having. So I double-checked the facts and figures earlier this evening, and the information that I've got is via Newsweek. I will tweet out a link to the article that I'm quoting for after the show. We have seen German, Spanish, and French being the subjects with the biggest drop in A-level entries compared to last year. So that's out of all subjects, not just out of languages. Out of all subjects, German, Spanish, and French are those with the biggest drop in A-level entries. Entries in German fell by 17% between last year and this year. In Spanish, they fell 12.7% from last year to this year. And from French, they fell 12.5% from last year to this year. So that's worrying, particularly when we were having very small cohorts at A-level to start with. There is good news, though. It's not all doom and gloom. At GCSE, French entries actually rose by 0.3%. We'll ignore the fact that that's a very small percentage, and we will enjoy the fact that it's a rise. Spanish was amazing. Spanish entries rose 4.6%, which is wonderful. And as a non-Spanish teacher, I'm very, very jealous of that. Unfortunately, because German is one of the languages that I teach, German GCSE entries did fall by almost 6%. The House of Commons Library research last year has highlighted that falling entries in German and Spanish specifically are behind the declining entries to MFL qualifications overall. So it really is our German and Spanish A-level entries that we need to be targeting if we're going to kind of equalize compared to where we were last year. And the government, of course, has launched its wonderful language hubs program for German that it is hoping will boost the uptake there. So it's a bit of a mixed picture. It is a bit of a mixed picture. Obviously, any falling is going to be very upsetting for us. But let's have a think. And this probably is specifically going to be for the teachers. So Corinne for you, Alicia for you, and Adam for you. What do you think the in-school factors are that could impact why a student doesn't pick a foreign language, and what can we do to mitigate those?
Are you talking at, sorry, it's Corinne, are you talking at GCSE or A-level?
I think just in general. I think if we open up in general, and then we can narrow down to one or the other.
I think there's this idea that languages are hard.
Yes.
Harder than other subjects, and I think it's kind of this myth going around schools, and so don't pick languages is hard. And I think that's one of the main issues. And also budget as well. And I think once there isn't a class for, let's say, GCSE French or A-level, I think it's difficult then to go back and trying to have another class. So if one year you don't have a year 12, then it's difficult to set the scene and say, okay, let's do, you can do A-level French if there isn't one anymore. So I think it depends on budget as well. I mean, there's lots of things going on in schools, budget and recruitment, the myth that obviously languages are difficult, and also the choices that they have. I mean, in some schools, they do make it compulsory to take a language at GCSE. Some don't. So if it's not compulsory, students will choose another one. At A level, they changed from the A2 AS to the current one also, because before they would choose 4 subjects at AS and maybe drop 3 for A2, but sometimes they would keep it. But now when you start the 2-year course with only 3, I think that's where we've lost a lot at A level, because before they would start 4 ASs and then carry on, because they thought, well, actually I've done it at AS, so I can carry on to A2. But yeah, so I think that would be the main issues currently.
Thank you. Those are some really, really interesting points. You touched on something that I was talking about with a colleague of mine today, which is the recruitment and retention of teachers. I mean, I'm very lucky because I work in an independent school, so we do justify classes of 1. But if you've got an A-level class of 1 in a state school, that's not always justifiable according to the budget. And then, of course, if you stop offering the subject at A-level, then fewer people are going to take it for degree, which means we're going to have fewer teachers, which means there will be fewer opportunities to study. And it becomes this kind of vicious cycle almost of people not having the language skills in order to train up the next generation of linguists. Do we think that the outside influences play a very big part in student choices? I'm thinking particularly at GCSE.
I would. Sorry, Darren.
No, that's right. Adam, go ahead.
I think absolutely. I think you look at how tight budgets are. You look at things. So, for instance, to give you a quote, we were in our extended leadership team meeting last week, and we looked at the cost of, for instance, even something as silly as paper in reprographics and how much we've used this year compared to last year, and you could fund you could finance an ECT off the amount that the increase in spend has been, which I think puts things into proportion especially when Corinne's talking about budget. I think staffing. I'm in the very, very lucky position that I've only got 1 member of staff going, and it's purely out of maternity more than anything else. So I've got a really stable team, a large team. But I think when it comes to classes and viability, I think people are feeling the pinch in terms of class sizes. I think hours are getting reduced as well, depending on smaller class sizes as well. And I think what Corinne said as well about the if you don't run a class for several years, you've also got the additional financial burden of, for instance, as we're seeing with the new 2024 specifications, having to fork out money perhaps for new resources, which is all expenditure. It's a lot of money. When I've worked in a school before where we've barely had enough money to print off end of term assessments. So I think that pinch is really, really affecting us. I also think that on the flip side, though, I think there's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of us that we were in danger of falling into as languages teachers of we're doomed, we're doomed. We're not, and we have to hold our heads up high. We have to be esteemed. We have to be proud of the languages that we teach. The fact that it's a very academic subject, but that we make it accessible to students and that they can do this. And I think I had an absolutely amazing teacher in Sunderland. I'm from the Durham coalfield, and she made that she left us with a present of the Lonely Planet Travel Guide to Spain, and realizing that there's a bigger world out there. And I think we have to really, really counter that self-fulfilling prophecy of actually it's all doom and gloom, but actually no, we're not. We're a bunch of professionals. We are in the right place where we can do this. And I think the hubs, the NCLE hubs, should really, really spearhead that kind of professionalism, that kind of unity, that we are a group of teachers not working in silos. I think if you work in a silo as well on your own, you are likely to potentially fall into that self-fulfilling prophecy of, oh, it's all doom and gloom, because you've got nobody else there to lift you up. You've got nobody else there, other heads of department perhaps, to have coaching conversations with. And I think that's really, really important, because if we give off the feeling of that sentiment towards students, they're not going to pick languages. We have to really, really sell it. We have to be the ones that can be like, we can get you the grids. We know how to get you the grids. You've got to trust in us. We will give you excellent teaching and learning, so choose a language. But then there's also the whole case of STEM. And I think looking at certain backgrounds and where certain children are raised to believe that STEM is the way forward, that's a hard one to battle. And just before I finish on that point, I think it's really interesting what Vincent Everett was saying the other day in terms of languages, are we just teaching them purely as a language discipline, or do we need to look at maybe creating a qualification that's slightly different, slightly more geared towards combining them with something else, so such as like a language and politics or something? I don't know. I think there's other avenues that we need to explore.
I would agree with that completely. I mean, my master's degree is in applied linguistics, and I've often thought it's a big shame that we don't have a specific linguistics GCSE or A level. The sort of thing that we do in English language A level, where we teach children how to analyze text properly, where we teach them why the parts of speech are important, and all that sort of thing. I think if we had that as a foundational subject, it might then increase interest in taking an actual language as they move up through the school. Although, of course, Pearson sponsoring, and I understand that. We understand that there are budgetary constraints for you guys as well. And so I'm sure there are all sorts of subjects that you would like to offer as an examined subject that you can't because you're under the same strain that we are. It is a difficult one. It is a difficult one. Adam, I was interested in what you said about the push for STEM, because that does kind of relate to the question that I was posing before about those outside influences, because we are now, as Polly has pointed out in a reply, we're now in a post-Brexit Britain. Languages were not exactly high on the list anyway because of the whole everybody speaks English. And so now with Brexit, they've kind of gone further down the priorities list because everything's become a little bit more insular. So do we think that these kind of external factors have had an impact?
I would say, without a doubt, they've had an impact. But then it's also about thinking cleverly outside the box. So, for instance, our careers, like our A-level careers advisor, we have members of staff who obviously they teach, but they also are specialists in kind of university applications, looking at Russell groups. And it's little things like such as, if a student wants to do medicine, for instance, they can do obviously the classic chemistry, they can do the classic like two sciences. But for instance, if they are good at languages and they want to pursue that, they can still do that and still apply for medicine. And are we telling students that they can do this, maybe that they still can continue that language, or are we maybe having the conversations that, for instance, you can combine languages with something else at university that you can do? For instance, I know where I went in Sheffield, you can do maths and Spanish, for instance, that you can do joint honours. I mean, it's what shocks me as well is the amount of times I've had to explain how the university credit system works. For instance, that you have like £120 to spend a year. You might spend £80 on your core economics, but then you've got £40 left to spend. Do you want to spend that on doing 20 credits in Spanish or 40 credits in Spanish? Like in the Languages Teaching Centre, students don't know that they've got these opportunities available for them. I think we've got the duty, as well as obviously pushing for A-level uptake, to promote those. And if we do show the importance of joint honours, if you do love language learning, you're good at it, you can apply for the likes of medicine, you can apply for STEM courses and still continue on. I think that's really important. We've got the duty to do that.
Absolutely. I think quite often we forget to show our students that languages are not necessarily a subject that you study to learn that language. It's a subject that you study to be able to do something else with it. So with the number of French speakers that there are in London, if you want to be a London-based doctor, learn French, because that's a really helpful language for you to have when you are dealing with someone who is not very well and will take comfort in speaking their native language to you. I think that's a really good point. Alicia, I wanted to ask you as a French teacher. French, of course, is traditionally the first modern language that students take up, and it will have been the language that parents tend to study. Do you find that there is a lot of influence from parents and from other people who have studied French towards your learners? Because there's the perception I get all the time of, oh well, French is really hard compared to Spanish.
Well, actually, I'm hearing a bit the opposite at the moment from a lot of people. Like, lots of students think that Spanish is much easier, and French is actually considered a lot, from what I'm seeing, that as an elite subject, a difficult subject. And it's quite sad, because lots of them, because they get stopped by that, because they think that it's only reserved for a certain type of student or type of people, they will not even give it a chance. And so motivation for me is a big, like, break on the learning, because if you don't try, of course you can't get it right. And that's something that students often forget. So it's a big problem. And for A levels, I wanted just to add that about something that was said before. I agree that if we are allowing 4 subjects, we would get much more intake. Like when we have some students wanting to do medicine, of course they are going to want to feel safe in having science. But the 4th subject that always I hear like my very high achiever saying, if they had a 4th subject, they would take French because they know it's important. It's just they don't have the space with only 3 languages, with only 3 subjects at A level. There is no space for us for an extra thing because they want to feel reassured. They want to feel that they get all the basis they think is important for university. And so they are not often leaving themselves with enough space on that 3 subjects. So that's one of the main problems for like our A level intake in my school, actually. And to go back for parental like support and engagement with French, it's clear that when parents have studied French and they enjoy it and they have a good memory of it, they are going to push their children to go for it, and they are going to be highly supportive. However, in a lot of cases, I don't know why, but people keep the memory that is difficult. And so maybe it's because they were part of another curriculum. Maybe it's because they studied a long time ago and so they don't remember it at all, or very few bits and pieces. But parental engagement is a key thing for student intakes. And we need to push that more and more in the years coming, because we see it when we do the open evenings for A level, for GCSEs. The parents are the ones taking their children to see us, and they are the one who are speaking about the language the best when they are motivated by it.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think it is really important for us to get the parents on board and to make sure that they understand the value of a language for their children as they go forward. Corinne, I was wondering if you had anything, if you, in maybe your consultancy work, if you've seen anything that we've kind of not touched on yet.
No, I think we've touched on quite a lot here, and I think, it's all about the budget, the recruitment, the provision, but also, we touched on, I think, a little bit on gradings as well, and sometimes it feels like teachers are saying, students achieve a grade less in languages, so, you're having to justify this to the schools as well. So I think we've gone around all the factors. And also as you said, the outside factors, this myth about languages that are not useful. So that, and the difficulty in having hard subjects. But I think we've touched on quite a lot here.
Amazing, thank you. So Katie and Mike, I suppose this is a good time to turn over to you, because we've talked about how there is that perception. I think Alicia picked it up perfectly. There is that perception that languages are hard. There is the perception that because we've got to work that bit harder, we won't get as high a grade. And so is it worth risking? So can I ask, to what extent does the new GCSE spec, which I know has been endorsed now in French, and I saw that Rebecca has tweeted out the draft vocab lists for Spanish and German this evening, to what extent is that going to address the student and parental concerns?
Yeah, there are so many different factors, aren't there, which all of the teachers have been kind of rightly discussing. And some of those factors are going to be things which are the more like the underlying cause of why a student might have some of those negative feelings about choosing a language for GCSE, and some of them are kind of the result of the impact of those choices being carried forward, aren't they? Around the perception of severe grading, I think it's kind of reasonable for us to acknowledge at this point that severe grading was kind of recognised as being an issue in MFL by Ofqual. And that's why for last year, there was that grading recalibration to slightly increase the number of candidates who could achieve at certain grades, because when they did a kind of analysis over time of student outcomes, they did find that because of the kind of way in which grades are allocated, there was a little bit of an adjustment that needed to be made. So I think it's okay for us to have talked about it as a perception up to that point, but at this point we can kind of accept that as a reality, which hopefully has been addressed somewhat. But in terms of the new GCSE, I think one of the most important things that we need to do is to really understand the root cause of that reluctance in students by actually asking the students themselves, what is it about learning a language that you really love? What is it that, as an output of learning a language, you would really want to be able to do? And then what is it about the way in which you're perhaps not even so much your language course in your school, but maybe your concept of this language qualification at the end of it, what is it about that that's kind of getting in the way and dampening your enthusiasm for the kind of things that you would love to be able to do with your language? And so really listening to that student voice, understanding that, you know, the vast majority of them want to be able to communicate with other people. They want to be able to speak. They want to be able to have conversations, make friends, make connections with different language speakers. And yet the speaking exam is one of the elements of the qualification as it stands in the kind of legacy world, where it's the most scary for them. I know it's kind of scary for teachers as well, because you've got this really critical role as the teacher examiner. You don't want to get anything wrong. The kids don't want to get anything wrong. We've heard all of these kind of stories from teachers as we've been going around talking about the new qualifications, you know, asking them how students feel in relation to the speaking assessments. And they're telling us they're terrified, they're scared, they're nervous, they're anxious. They can, you know, they get themselves in a real state. And at the same time, talking and communicating is one of the great gifts that learning a foreign language can give us. So in the new qualification, we need to do everything that we can to try and take some of that fear and some of that negativity that's associated with the language away. So making sure they feel confident, making sure they can feel in control, feel well prepared, and all of those kind of things. And if we can get to the root of some of those emotional reasons why a student might not want to take a language, hopefully over time, as that experience filters back down, we've talked about from, you know, parents to children, but also from siblings to siblings, as that kind of filters down through the year groups at school, languages actually can be something really fun. It's an opportunity to play. It's an opportunity to try new things, almost to kind of get a different perspective on yourself, try on a different kind of personality with this new kind of language skill that you can gain. If we can get some of that fun back, and not quash that through a qualification model that kind of that squeezes all the fun out of it, then hopefully that will go away to making languages more attractive at GCSE and then subsequently beyond that.
Absolutely. I agree, Katie, completely. And it's lovely to hear you talk about asking the students what it is they want. Because ultimately, and I say this to my students all the time, I've got my GCSE in French. I don't need another one. And so it's their qualification, and it should be led by them. It should be about what they want to learn. So I'm really glad that you've been having those conversations and kind of finding that out. It must be quite difficult, though, from your perspective and Mike, from yours, to get a balance in the exam, to make sure that it is academically rigorous, to make sure that we're not dumbing down, while making sure that we are accessible and what the kids want to study.
Yeah, that's a good point and a good question. And I think the new GCSEs are trying to address that a lot, in particular when you think about the word count now. So it's about the most frequently used words that students will use. And although they might be cutting down the vocabulary, it's going to be more accessible and more usable. So actually, it's going to be a positive change in the end. And I think some of the other things to consider are just historically. I mean, I remember doing this. I mean, I'm nearly close to 50 now, and I remember when I was 16, I did get the ski trip picture card, if you remember those people on the card. I got that and hadn't been. And I think there's other things that we're in control of is making sure that languages doesn't become the realm of exclusivity, and students aren't put in those positions of imagining scenarios that they, it's hard enough for them to even answer, where did you go last week? And they know what they did last week, but sometimes it's difficult to sort of put it out there. But if you ask them, okay, you're on a ski slope now, what are you going to do today? And that is in a situation they've got no idea about that. Some do, some don't. I think that level playing field is really important. I don't think that's dumbing down the qualification. It's just purely making sure they can have a better go at showing the language they've got knowledge of, the experiences they have. They can put that using the language they have, and I think that's a big thing that is going to be a huge improvement in the new qualification. And again, like Katie says, after one or two, even right now we've had accessibility amends put through last year, and people are talking about it. And if you see on social media this year, the noise coming out afterwards, or the sort of comments coming out, is a lot more positive very quickly. And it'll take maybe 3 more goes of that, and suddenly my son is taking GCSEs in 3 years. He'll be like, okay, this is something I want to take. And my younger son, after that, he'll have his older brother saying, hey, listen, language is a good thing to do. Off you go and take it. And he'll take it, which is one of the things that made me take it. I had an older sibling who took languages. So I think there's lots of things we have done. I don't think the fear of dumbing down should be something we're concerned about. We should be getting students to love languages, because after all, at the age of 16, after taking GCSEs, we're not expecting students to be fluent speakers. If I ask everyone on the call, when did you become a fluent speaker? I'm sort of probably jumping the gun here, but I expect most of you say probably that year abroad when you did that Erasmus year. And so we just want to carry on. And that's the big thing we want to do, is make sure there's a cumulative effect. We get that change. We have overall perception in school zeitgeist and then in society, language is something that you should take and is enjoyable. And then we'll have, hopefully a different perspective, potentially politically or economically in the future.
Absolutely. I think that's really interesting, because it kind of loops back to the parental input that we were talking about before, because particularly for maybe our students who have parents who didn't study beyond GCSE or O-level, who left school at 16, GCSEs may have been the most difficult exams that they took. And so for those parents, GCSEs are really, really hard, and they're this big thing. And that then gets passed down onto the students. So I think it's really important for us to remind our students that actually, no, you don't need to be a Chinese person in order to get a 9 in Chinese. You just need to have a decent grasp of the language, because that fluency will come later.
Yeah. And I think to also get that really clear picture on what good and successful in a language means when we're learning a second language at GCSE level, because unlike any other subject, you've got your mother tongue sat there next to the language which you're trying to learn at the relatively late age of 12 as this constant kind of comparative judgment. Well, I'm 100% fluent in my native tongue. I can express all of these complicated thoughts, and yet in French, German, Spanish, Chinese, whatever it might be, I feel so much less competent. And in order to feel competent, I somehow have to be able to align my second language acquisition with my first language acquisition. And of course, you don't have to be anywhere near that. Our perception as language learners and language assessors for what is a brilliant, outstanding and stupendous performance for GCSE, grade 9, grade 7, grade 4, whatever it might be, has to be something that's reasonable and realistic. But also as learners, we have to accept the fact that that's good enough, that's plenty, that's fine, I'm doing well. And I think that your mother tongue comparison can sometimes be a little bit misleading, and that is definitely not what we're after when we're looking at high performance for GCSE, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure that Adam, Alicia, and Corinne can also attest to this. How often a student comes up to you and asks for the most complicated sentence, and it tends to be when they're in kind of key stage 3. In my experience, year 7, 8, and 9, they'll come and they'll say, oh, but I want to say last weekend I went to the tallest cinema at the top of the Eiffel Tower with my third cousin twice removed, and we watched a fantastic film that was full of japes and laughs, and we had a jolly time. I have to say to them, no, that's not how French works. First of all, and secondly, that's not what I need you to do. I just need you to say, "Je suis allé au cinéma." So I think, I mean, it sounds to me really, really encouraging, what you're saying. And I did look through the new spec again for French earlier, and I really liked what I saw, and I felt that it is very student centered. I liked the inclusive language that is starting to be brought in. I liked that you were already thinking about, well, what happens with students who take gender neutral pronouns, for example, in English. It does feel like the exam is moving towards Generation Z, moving towards what is relevant and important to them, which I think is really vital. So I will throw out again to the teachers, in no particular order, so feel free to unmute and speak as you would like to. What do we need to be doing, do you think, in order to kind of capitalize on this student-centered exam, as we're redesigning our curricula, as it were?
Is it okay to speak, Ice, Corinne?
Yes.
Obviously, having worked on the list with Pearson and on the new spec and some of the sample assessments, and being a teacher as well, obviously I've got the two sides of it. I think we need to rethink the way that we teach the specification, because for so many years and so many specifications, the language acquisition has been driven by themes, and topics. Whereas with this one, it's going to be driven by the list. The list is going to be your drive. The list is going to be what students have to be able to manipulate. It's going to be able to talk through different topics. So it's not just about I'm learning the theme of whatever. Here is all the words I need to know, but it's going to be completely different. Actually, the themes are, and they're not optional, but they came after the list, because we were designing the list and we say, okay, here are the words that we have. Okay, what are the themes that we can come up with the words that we have? So, it's been a very long process making up the list. I mean, I started on the list at Easter 2 years ago, so it's been
Wow.
a long time. And as Katie and Mike were saying, we're trying to be very inclusive and trying to look at what are the words that we are going to need, or the pupils are going to need to be able to express themselves, and also to be pupil centered, and also for them to express their interest as well, to be relevant to them. So there's been a lot of discussion about what pupils wanted to learn. So I think it's going to be more of a rethink of how we teach. So the list being the center of our teaching, and how we're going to reuse those words in different scenarios and different themes. That's what. And also I think a lot of support to teachers, because again, if we had to rethink how to teach, so not just about, as I was saying, per theme, but how to use that list, and how to manipulate those words, and how to manipulate the grammar that is in there as well, because there are some constraints to that list, but also to realize that actually the list is there, and what's going to be the exam is going to be in the list, but it's not going to be the end of the teaching. For example, if they want to say something, it's not because it's not in the list that as a teacher I'm not going to teach it. For example, if they want to say the color purple, for example, that is not in the list, I'm still going to teach them the color purple, but actually they know that this is not going to be the exam. So I think it's that understanding that even though it's not in the list, we still need to provide that breadth of knowledge of the language, and it's not because it's not in the grammar list that we're not going to teach that point of grammar. So I think it's just understanding what has driven this new specification, which is the list. And yes, it's just what could be done with that list, and how creative we could be with that, and just to give it to the students. And here is a few words. What can you say about yourself with those few words? What do you want to talk about? So it's more giving it to them, and the topics are very broad and general, so they should be able to talk about themselves, and they are very open in terms of topics. So it's up to them to reuse different words in different topics to just talk about whatever they want to talk about. I think I'm going to stop here. I think other teachers might want to say anything else, but I could go on and on about this new spec, because I've been involved a lot in it. I don't know, Katie, do you want to say anything about the new list, or the new spec and the teaching? Or
Yeah, it's really interesting because, as Mike said, one of the key differences between we have to call it the legacy GCSE now, even though it only feels 5 minutes ago that we were talking about the new GCSE for
Yeah.
2016, isn't it? It's not worth counting how many years have gone by sometimes. So with the legacy GCSE, ballpark, you've got about 2,500 words that make up the minimum core vocabulary list there. With
Okay.
the new GCSE, for the higher tier, 1,700 words on the vocabulary list, and for the foundation tier, 1,200 words. So quite a significant reduction in the number of words. So what that means is, as Corinne said, we've had these parameters around where those words have to come from. So 85% of them have to come from the top 2,000 most frequently occurring words in that language. So the idea there is to give learners the most frequent words that can be used in the highest number of different contexts, so that when they've got that core vocabulary of frequent words, they can communicate, they can understand, they can use the language productively and receptively in the maximum number of transferable situations almost. And then for the 15% that come from somewhere else, obviously making sure that that's where you've got words which are age appropriate. I don't know if anyone has ever read the Routledge French Frequency Dictionary. I'm sure Corinne will join me in saying I don't recommend it.
Yes, I have. I know it off by heart.
Unless you're suffering from insomnia, I don't recommend it as bedtime reading. But what you'll find, if you're familiar with frequency dictionaries, is they draw on corpuses. And, that corpus wasn't put together with 16-year-old English second language learners at its heart, So it might come from legal materials, it might come from sort of highbrow, broadsheet journalism type materials. There's going to be words in there that have got no relevance to your learner group. So we obviously don't want to include those. So you've got this 15% of other words that can come to make your content relatable, make sure it's reflective of the type of cohorts that we're teaching, making sure that it's inclusive, but also really funny little foibles in the frequency dictionaries. Now, I can't remember, one of my colleagues remember whether it was Spanish, I think it was, that of all the numbers that we were going to include, because obviously no presumed prior knowledge for the new GCSE, so you've got your days of the week, your numbers, your colours and all of those kind of things, but the number 16 isn't in the top 2,000. So you've got these 16-year-old, 15-year-old children learning this GCSE course, and the number 16 isn't there. So obviously you're using your 15% to backfill to make sure that list is relevant to the learner. Thursday wasn't in there, even though you had to be like lundi, mardi, mercredi. Oh, I don't know, vendredi, samedi.
even with chips and something like that, it wasn't in the list. So we had, because if you ask them what do you eat, they're probably going to say chips, but that was not in the top 2,000, so we had to include it. So lots of words like that we know as teachers that pupils want to use, but they were not in the top 2,000. So we had a lot of dilemma about what to include, and so it's been a very long process.
I think one of the things that is really reassuring about this, though, is, as Corinne said, you are obviously not, as teachers, we're not going to say to our students, let's say, for example, and this is just an example number, there's 10 sports in the list of sports. Your most frequent, most kind of generic football, tennis, whatever it might be. And then you have a student that's like, oh, sir, oh, miss, I'm the Southampton under 17 pole vault champion. How do I say pole vault? We're not going to say, well, I'm not telling you because it's not in the top 2,000, obviously. I'm not telling you it's not on the list. We can broaden and expand the children's vocabulary beyond the list. But what's really reassuring is in all of the receptive tasks, so in all of the listening materials and in all of the reading materials, we will only ever use words off the list. So it's not a competition to who can learn the most or who knows more is going to gain more. We're only ever going to base the listening and the reading tasks within the 1,700 or 1,200 words. And then for the speaking and the writing, those are set to guide the students towards the words that are on the list. And there's no additional credit for students drawing on wider vocabulary. They get equal credit So if it asks about sports and I say football and that's on the list, but somebody else says pole vaulting and that's not on the list, we get equal credit. That's only fair. But I don't get extra credit for knowing an extra word, because then you're into the kind of area of rewarding volume as opposed to just knowledge of the core content of the qualification. So I think in that sense, the list-based, frequency-based approach with the shorter number of words and only using those in the receptive skills and equally rewarding them in the productive skills will help students to feel more knowledgeable about what they're going to see and what they're going to hear when they do go into their exams.
That's really reassuring, because it sounds very much like you've taken a common sense approach when designing this new spec, which of course is one of the things that we need to be able to reiterate to our students when they're making their choices. Because, you know, a couple of years ago on Teacher Twitter, we were talking about corpora and the high frequency words, and you know, we were pointing out the fact that I don't speak Spanish, but I remember vividly one of the words for priest or monk comes up very, very high in the frequency because it's a Catholic country, so of course it does.
Yeah.
And you know, there was concern that that these 2000 most common words were just going to be blithely plucked from the internet and put into a vocab list. So you know, it is reassuring to us that you've taken the time to sit and think about what is valuable to these students, because you know, we know they want to feel represented, we know they want to feel like their qualifications are relevant to them, and it really feels like you've done the work to make that happen.
Also, when you're looking at sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something about it, because it's not just the vocabulary that is changing in this new GCSE, it's also the fact that we are also putting a big emphasis on the phonics there. And that's really important for students, because they want to speak, but they don't just want to speak. They want to sound native, to sound fluent. And when you tell them, oh, good, your sentence was great, because you put like the verb, the adjective, etc., they're happy about it. But when you tell them that the pronunciation was great and they sound like native, you see a boost in their motivation and in their confidence, that even if every single word in the sentence wasn't correct, they are going to feel much more empowered by this comment. And so phonics and being able to read a full text without having to be like repeating behind the teacher 10 times, because there is like words like different or on that are very difficult in French, is extremely rewarding for students. And that's what they are looking for, especially in Key Stage 3. And we want to motivate Key Stage 3 in order for them to pick it for Key Stage 4. So that's, for me, one of the key points that I really appreciate in the new one.
I think, that's a really good point. And I'd not thought of it that way before, because I will admit, I was one of those teachers who was trained not to ask children to read aloud. And so when I heard that read aloud was coming into the speaking, I was a little bit apprehensive. But it is interesting, Alicia, to hear your point and to think about how that could be rewarding for them, because it is about the pronunciation. And that is the thing that they like to get right. And it is funny how our students get hung up on that. I teach in a school with lots of international students who speak perfect English, but of course don't sound like British people. And our students hear that and they know that. And yet when they come to their lessons, they want to sound French, they want to sound Chinese. And so for them, quite often, pronunciation isn't enough and accent is important. So I like that idea of being able to reward it. I think that's really cool.
And also like that, you can reach more students, because it's not like you learn the grammatical rule. It belongs a lot to your ear and the way you are listening to words. And so sometimes the student who is not the most academic might get it extremely right. So it can be frustrating for some, but you might reach more students. Absolutely.
So what I'm going to do, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, I can't believe how quickly this hour has flown, technical difficulties aside, let's spin the title of this slightly, because I want to go back to what Adam said earlier about being positive, making sure that we're not dragging it down. So instead of thinking about why are languages relevant? Why are students not choosing languages? Let's spin it and say, right, what are we going to do to make sure that they do? What can we bring into our practice, such as rewarding them for their accent that is going to infuse them? We've got 3 minutes to solve this whole problem.
I think for me, just with my results head on more than anything else, I've got a team that will want to know the new specification, will want to know the new how the exam's going to be marked inside out. And I think if we know that, and if our students trust in our knowledge of that and trust that we can do everything in our powers to get them those marks, I think that for me will really help our students have that positive mentality that they can do it, that they will do it. I think for me as well, it's engaging in, for instance, one of the hardest things I found with the legacy spec was when we changed over to it and we had to provide data, and that data was calculated off the old specification. Our students were all of a sudden getting grades 1s and 2s, and then they magically come out with 8s, 9s, and 7s. And I think that for me is going to be a hard sell, but not one that's impossible. And it's going to be kind of just them trusting in our knowledge and our understand that spec. So for me, it's going to be getting my head, getting the team's heads in the new specifications, working out the examination criteria, what they're going to be tested on, and really just drip feeding that in.
I love it. That's so true, because as much as we want to believe that they are there to learn our subject, the cold truth is they are there to get a GCSE or to get an A level. And so they need to believe that we know what we're doing in training them through that. So actually, on that point, Katie and Mike, can I ask you, I know there have been lots of kind of getting to know the new GCSE events. You've been doing them live, which has been really cool. Are they going to carry on? Will there be an online one that we can refer back to? Kind of what is coming for us as the teachers to solidify our knowledge of the new spec?
Well, Mike's been leading on getting our programme of events together, so I'll let him let you know what's upcoming.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got lots of... We've had about 45 to 50 events so far. We're going to have a series. Have a look online. If you go to pdacademy.pearson.com, anyone listeners here, so pdacademy.pearson.com, and look up under secondary and languages, and you'll find launch events that are coming up soon. So where you can choose where to sign up for. We've got various ones still taking place around the country. We've got them in Newbury, Rugby, Ipswich, Birmingham, Ascot, Cheltenham, Manchester, Ripon, London, Ashington. That's before the end of the school year. And then in the last 2 weeks of September, we're going to have a few more events running in the major cities as well as online as well. So you haven't missed it. We're going to have a couple more online. We have them in Manchester, London, Birmingham, and around the more the corners, Newcastle, Sheffield, Leeds, etc. So keep your eyes out for those. They're coming up live soon, and then we'll be starting from October the getting ready to teachers qualification training. So they'll be coming out, I'd say, within the next couple of weeks. So keep your ears and eyes to the ground on the social media sphere, and at pdacademy.pearson.com. You'll find everything there, and hopefully we'll see you face to face very shortly.
Excellent. I do hope so. Now, I'm going to ask a question while I have you here that I don't know if you can answer, and if you can't, that's absolutely fine. But I think by now we've all been through enough cycles to assume that a change in GCSE spec means that a change in A-level spec is coming soon.
Well, I mean, it's a fairly logical assumption. What I can say from my position as a person who works on the development of qualifications as my main bread and butter is I have not heard anything, official or otherwise, about the plans for the A-levels in French, German or Spanish. So I can be... Now, that's not to say that, Nick Gibb would be ringing me up and saying, hey, Katie, I've got some plans, I'd just like to run past you. But, as Karine said, she spent the better part of 2 years working on the vocab list. We were working on the 2024 development. It was, interestingly, the last meeting I had before we got sent home at lockdown.
Oh, wow.
So that would have been three and a half years ago.
Yeah.
So there's a long lead-in time usually, and as far as I know, lowly as I am, there isn't motion at the moment, at least not that we're involved in, around A-level, but one would have to assume that it must be on the longer horizon simply in order to support progression.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a safe assumption. But I will say, just in case anybody in the decision-making arena is listening, it's always nice for us to be able to digest and get to know the new spec first, so that, as Adam said, we can be confident delivering the new GCSE before having to then also teach a whole new A-level. So, Nick Gibb, if you are listening, if you want to just pin that for a little while, we would appreciate
it. Yeah, just give Katie a ring and let her know.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And then we'll have Katie back on the show in a couple of weeks' time to tell you about it. Oh, right. Well, like I said, I can't believe how quickly this hour has gone. I have loved every minute of it. So I would like to thank all of my guests, to thank Katie and Mike from Pearson, to thank Pearson, of course, for sponsoring the event this evening. So Katie and Mike, thank you both ever so much.
You're welcome. Our pleasure.
To thank Karine for her contribution here this evening and all of the work she's clearly put into the list. I'm going to study the list again and make sure I let you know how much I love it. And to Alicia and Adam, our two teachers on the ground who have joined us with some really interesting things that I'm going to think about as I introduce the new spec to my kids. Thank you both so much.
Cheers, Darren.
Thank you.
And of course, to you, the listeners, thank you so much. We will, in fact, be back in a couple of weeks' time. Pearson is sponsoring another space with us that I will be hosting. So I really, really do hope that you will join us then. And please do, regardless of which exam board you teach, please do check out the new Pearson spec because it is an interesting one. And I think it will be a good one to teach.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
So, from us here at Teach Talk Radio, from my guests, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.